Hello, it's Hannah from Stitching Kitchen. Today I just wanted to pop on and tell you all about the new embroidery kit that I've just launched. I wanted to talk you through everything that you get when the kit arrives and also just give you a quick overview of the stitches I've used in this kit. All of the instructions on how to create the embroidery stitches used are included in the kit, but I know sometimes people like to see things rather than just read about it, hence the reason for today's video. So just to show you what comes in the kit, this is how it arrives in the little plastic box. Inside you will have a piece of printed cloth which has been Indian block printed by myself with an elephant on it. Also in the kit you will have 4 different coloured threads. There is a little bit more on the cards in the actual kits. Each kit contains 3 meters of 4 different colours. You'll also have 2 little pink packets like this. This one's containing the seed beads for this one, and the other pack will have some interesting beads and sequins that you can then stitch on. Your kit will also contain 2 needles, one of which is an embroidery needle, which has got, although it doesn't look like it, it has got a larger eye. And the other one is a very tiny thin needle, which is for beading. I prefer to use a short beading embroidery needle rather than the traditional long beading needle for this type of work. You also receive full instructions, so there is a step-by-step guide as to what you will need and also your stitch guide. You'll also notice that it suggests that you will need a 5-inch embroidery hoop and a pair of embroidery scissors, both of which you can buy from the Stitching Kitchen website. Here are examples of both of those. The use of an embroidery hoop is optional, but you will find it will keep your piece of linen cloth nice and taut and keep your stitches straight. If you prefer to do your work without an embroidery hoop, that is absolutely fine. First thing I wanted to show you is how to fit your design into your embroidery hoop. Embroidery hoops come in 2 parts, one with the clamp, one full circle. A lot of people will tell you it's a nice idea to wrap the inner circle with some old cloth or a bit of old bias binding tape just so that it grips the fabric better. With this nice linen, probably not necessary, but it just depends on what you're stitching. The first thing you do is pop your hoop underneath the design and center it so the design is within the hoop with a little bit of space around so that you can move your needle around. Loosen off the clamp and then place that over the top and press down. That way you will have a nice taut piece of cloth within the hoop. You then start to tighten that hoop, tighten the screw, and then just tug on the fabric around the edge to make sure that it is as tight as a drum. Let's hope that it is. Tighten that, and often you will find this has space for a screwdriver so you can really tighten it. That way you won't find your fabric slipping out during the process. Yep, drum tight, perfect. Just a quick word on embroidery thread. I was taught that if you use a length of thread which is approximately the length of your arm from finger to elbow, that is perfect because it's not too long, it won't get tangled, and the more the thread moves in and out through the fabric, the more likely it is to dull and to fray. So about this length is perfect. When you come to separate your threads, I've provided you with 6-stranded cotton as part of the kit. The way that I was taught to separate my threads is to pull one at a time, the group of threads. So I'm just separating the ends out there. So if you just gently grasp the thread in one hand and then pull away with the other, you'll separate the 6 threads quite easily. So there's one ready for the beading needle, and then I'll separate 3 off here for the embroidery. And hopefully, oops, slight tangle there, we'll be ready to go. So there's 2 left there for another day, 3 here to thread up for the embroidery needle and 1 for the beading needle. I'm sure that everybody has their opinion as to which order you should fill in when you're doing an embroidery like this. I don't think it matters at all. And so the way I talk you through it in the kit is the way that I did it as I created the design. So I'm going to start with the beads. Other people might want to leave those till the end. Both is fine by me. I really don't mind. So I'm going to just quickly show you the 2 stitches I use to attach beads to the elephant. So I have my beading needle threaded with 1 strand of embroidery thread. I'm going to use the quilter's knot, which I was taught last year. So you put the end of the thread down towards the eye of the needle, or wrap it around a couple of times, pinch, and then pull the thread through. That will leave you with a knot that hangs straight, allegedly. So I'm going to start by applying some beads to one of the dotted areas here. So I'm going to come up from the back of the embroidery, from the back of the design. I'll then pick up a bead on my needle like that. And as you can see with the beading needle, it goes on really easily. And then I'm going to pop back in quite close to it. So this is effectively doing running stitch, picking up a bead each time. So I'm going to come up quite close. We're going to cover each of these dots with a bead, and if you've got a little piece of velvet to pop your beads on, I always think that helps just hold them a bit stiller than on a slidey cutting mat, and then pop back through. So that is the running stitch method of attaching the bead. The second method that I use is a back stitch, so in which case you're going to come up at the far side. I'm working upside down, so excuse me. At the far side of the dot, pick up your bead like so, thread it down, and then you're back stitching. So this time you're coming back towards the previous stitch. It's got a little bit wobbly, it's fine. And again, in ahead of where you want to go, pick up your seed bead on your needle, slide it down, and then back through where the previous stitch finished. So those are the 2 methods of attaching your beads, by running stitch and by back stitch. So now I've got the needle threaded with 3 strands of embroidery thread. I'm just going to run through all the other stitches that are in the stitch guide so that you have an idea. I'm not going to complete this on film because that would be incredibly boring, but there we go. So the first one on the list is a running stitch. So you come up from behind. I've knotted this thread and then you go back in. The idea is that this is an extremely easy stitch. Anyone can do a running stitch. You simply come up and down. The trick to a good running stitch is to make sure that they are evenly spaced, but you can do an awful lot with a running stitch. You could fill in the entire thing in running stitch and it will look beautiful. So there is no need to be scared about embroidery. It literally is that simple. A running stitch. The next stitch on the stitch guide is the back stitch. So again, you're coming up from behind. Again, quite a simple stitch. So the first one is very similar to the running stitch. So you're just going to come up and then go back down on the stitch line. The difference is this time when you come back up a small distance away, so this is your stitch length away, you're actually going to go back on yourself. So you're going to make a nice solid line of stitches. Again, the more even the stitches are, the neater it will look. But this is a great way to fill in lines, and one I would suggest would look fantastic to complete the edge of the elephant with, if that's what you wanted to do. I'm just doing these nice straight lines to make it easy to demonstrate, really. Okay, so that is back stitch. Now for cross stitch. In this case, I'm going to just fill in one of these little gaps on the saddle cloth on the elephant. So again, knotted thread coming up from behind. Now, normally cross stitchers would work on a canvas, and so their stitches can be extremely neat. But I'm just going to show you the method of doing it. So what you're going to do is you're going to do one direction first. So you're going to come up from, and this is where my left and right go wrong, you come from bottom right to top left of each stitch. So if you imagine the cross stitch as being the 4 corners of a little square, an imaginary square, you're going to go from the bottom right to the top left. And apologies if it's the other way around from your side of the table. So you go and do all of the stitches in one direction first. So we've done 4 little horizontal stitches. Now, obviously my imaginary box is not quite square. I'm seeing now that it's going to look a little bit wonky. But now you come along and you go from bottom left to top right. And you will see that each stitch, the bottom half of the cross is going in one direction and the top half of the cross goes in the other direction. And that means that you get a lovely sheen on your embroidery thread, even with this cotton embroidery thread, and it catches the light beautifully. And it's, there we go, as simple as that. So that is how you do a cross stitch, and a great way of filling in bigger areas actually. The next stitch on the stitch guide is chain stitch. This is one that actually some people find easier without a hoop. But what you do is you come up from the back and then you're going to go back in where you've just come up, but you're going to keep a hold of this thread so it doesn't go all the way through. So a fraction away from where you've just come up, or even in the same hole, is fine. And now I've caught effectively the loop of the chain. And my next task is to come up in between that loop and then, sorry, getting in the way, and then pulling it. So now we have a loop with potentially the next part of the chain coming out of the loop. So now we're going to pop our needle back in inside the loop of the chain, quite close or even in the same spot as the previous stitch, and come back again within that loop. So you do need to use your thumb of your opposite hand to pull your thread through. So once you get going with this stitch, it's quite quick, it looks great, and you can use it to, again, follow the lines on a pattern like this one, or you can fit lots of these chain stitches next to each other, and it's a good way of filling in an area. I do have quite a pretty piece of embroidery I did years ago, which is a landscape, and it's completely done with chain stitch. I was obviously going through a chain stitch phase back then, and so I've completely filled the background fabric with chain stitch from the sky all the way down to the foreground. Anyway, there we go. There's little stitches there at the bottom of the blanket on the back of this little elephant, just along there to complete. So we've got the thread coming up from the last part of the chain there. To complete the stitch and to anchor it down, you're just going to pop back in quite close to, but obviously trapping that last loop. So you're going to go back in on the far side of the loop, and there you have your chain stitch. The next stitch is satin stitch. Again, you come up from behind. I'm going to actually fill in one of these little cuffs on the elephant's foot. So a satin stitch is a stitch where you're filling in an area. You simply create your stitches from one side to the other, filling up. The stitches need to go nice and close to each other. So it really is a colouring in stitch. There we go, got a little bit of resistance there. As you can see, the closer you get the stitches, the better. And the idea is that they don't cross over each other. To make a really neat edge, you can, if you wish, put a back stitch or a running stitch along each edge of the area that you're filling in. But you just continue in that vein until the whole area is filled in. I won't bore you with showing you the entire lot, but hopefully when I show you the next stitch, that little area will be complete. The next stitch is split stitch. This is one I don't use very often, but I found that I've kept turning to it when I was creating this kit. The reason is it's very similar to chain stitch and it gives that nice effect, but it's a little bit smaller. So for the amount of work I wanted to put into this kit, it's quite a good way of getting that look of chain stitch without the amount of space needed. So you start off very much like back stitch, but this time instead of coming up, basically what you're going to do is you're going to come up in the middle of the previous stitch and split it, hence the name. This will give you that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Bumpy surface, that little bit of texture. And I think it does look quite similar in a lot of ways to the chain stitch. The fiddly bit is getting your needle up in the right area and then splitting the stitch. Have I managed to split it? I'm just going to tilt it towards myself. There we go. Okay, and I've accidentally pulled up a little bit of red fluff from the previous stitching. Teach me to keep the back of my work a little bit neater, which I never do. And then back in over here. So yes, a word about the back of my work. Best not looked at. Is probably the best thing to say. I don't work in a terribly neat fashion, so waist knots and tying in all the threads are not my way, I'm afraid. I'm more about creating the texture and being naughty and breaking all the rules, really. But here we go. Here's split stitch, and I hope on the video there you can see that there is a similarity between the split stitch and the chain stitch, but it just sort of lent itself to this project for me, so I've included it in the instructions there. So there we go, some split stitch. The next stitch on the instructions is the French knot, one of my favourites, and I have done another video about that stitch, which I'm sure my technical team will be able to put a link to. So again, come up from behind. I've put a knot behind. This time what you're going to do is a little bit more technical, so I'm going to just pop the hoop down. I hope you can still see. You need two hands on the top for this bit. So we have the thread coming up, we have our needle. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap around. I actually usually do it 3 times. You can just do it once, twice, as many as you like. You're going to keep that thread taut so that the knot slips to the bottom of the, to the bottom of the needle. It needs to sit against the fabric. You need to keep it taut because what you're going to do now is to push the needle through the knot, and you will need to twist a little bit to get it to come through nicely, she says. There we go. So what you're doing is you're creating a knot on the top of the surface, and there we have it. And the last stitch that I've included within this kit is Lazy Daisy Stitch. And in my design, I have created a Lazy Daisy Stitch on the end of the trunk to form a flower. So Detached Chain Stitch or Lazy Daisy Stitch is one that you can use to create the petals of a flower. So in the same way as we did with the previous chain stitch, we're going to create that loop and then bring our needle back up thus, but it's detached as the name suggests, so we're going to do that anchoring ending stitch. So there we have one petal. So I am now going to create another couple of petals to make a little daisy. So the trick is to try and get them, all the petals, to begin in roughly the same spot. Having a little bit of resistance there. There we go. You don't want to pull too hard because otherwise your petals become very skinny, which I may have just done with the poor previous petal. There we go. So you want to try and keep an element of fullness to your petals. I'm just turning the hoop round because it makes it easier for me to create the stitch. My brain's not great at spatial awareness. There we go. So try not to pull them too tight, otherwise you end up with very skinny petals. So I've created 3 petals now. I think the rule of nature is 3s and 5s. So if I try and get to 5 petals on this little flower on the end of the elephant's trunk, hopefully I will be pleased with that. Now, one thing I am going to say about this kit is you don't have to follow my instructions. You can create your own design using as many stitches as you know, or just one that's your favourite. There are plenty of books and videos out there to help you with embroidery, or obviously I would advocate going along to your local Embroiderers Guild meeting to learn from very knowledgeable people that will be sitting in the room with you. So there we have it. That is the embroidery stitch Lazy Daisy stitch or detached chain. So when you're finished, hopefully your little elephant is going to look something like this. If you've enjoyed today's video, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to be the first to know when a new video is launched. I'd love to know if you've got any questions or queries as a result of this video, so please pop them in the box below. Thanks!